All right, judges, please introduce yourselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Molly Russell. I'm an attorney with Legal Aid of West Virginia, and I specialize in domestic violence law. This is my first year judging the We the People National Contest. Michael?
Hello, I'm Dr. Michael Anderson. I live in northern Minnesota. As Ed and I have been sharing with our teams, I'm this far from Canada. He's a little farther from Canada. And I'm a retired professor and a retired college administrator, and I work with the Native American kids in the nearby school systems. This is my 16th national finals.
I'm Ed Philpott. I'm a trial lawyer. My office is in Laconia, New Hampshire, in the Lakes region. And I am slightly farther from Canada than Michael is. This is my third year judging the national finals.
All right, students, go ahead and introduce yourself and your teacher, please.
Hi, I'm Lily Dardanelle, and we are juniors from the Williston Northampton School.
Hi, I'm Walter Solzak.
Hi, I'm Daniel McKiernan.
Hi, I'm Megan Alvarado, and this is our teacher, Mr. Gunn.
Molly, you're on mute.
Yeah, I muted myself and started reading the question. I just got back from lunch. We'll get it rolling. Okay. Unit 4. How have the values and principles embodied in the Constitution shaped American institutions and practices? Question 2. Members of Congress are not only legislators, but they are also inquisitorial and should meet frequently to inspect the conduct of the public officers. How effectively do you believe Congress has used its investigatory power? Bullet 1. Explain the differences, if any, between Congress's power to investigate and the power of oversight. Which power, in your opinion, is more significant? Bullet 2. How effectively do you believe Congress has used its oversight powers? You may now answer.
While crafting the Constitution, George Mason thought legislators should make inquiries regarding public officers' questionable actions to ultimately inspect their conduct to the fullest extent. This inherent power is necessary and can be used in many situations, ranging from special circumstances, like the sinking of the Titanic, to uncovering illegal surveillance on Americans. Congress has effectively used the investigatory power in many instances, except impeachment.
Congress also has the oversight power, which is more significant because it checks the executive. The use of the oversight is essential to maintain a Republican constitutional government. As Federalist 51 states, it is necessary to keep each other in their proper places. The oversight power is a way to check the executive and keep them in their proper place.
Congress has not always effectively used its investigatory power, yet the inherent power is one of the most important powers Congress has. This power checks federal officials, uncovers public opinion, and supervises the execution of federal laws. The investigatory power also helps find information to make legislation from, secure partisan gains, and oversee administrative agencies. It has been used to investigate in special circumstances ranging from Pearl Harbor to the Challenger space shuttle explosion.
Investigation is essential in deciding on impeachment as well as the trial itself. Although they work together, the effectiveness of the investigatory power is not shown through impeachment. Just over 20 officials have been impeached, while only 8 were actually convicted. However, the effectiveness of the investigatory power was shown in 1885 when it was used to investigate the railroad and water interstate transportation regulations, which led to the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887. The investigatory power is necessary in keeping the legislature in equal power to the executive branch. The Constitution enables the use of checks and balances between these two branches.
The Constitution does not directly state that Congress has a power of investigations. Article 1 states all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. The inherent power is so essential and ingrained in American ideology that it does not need to be explicitly stated. The framers intended for Congress to be able to investigate when they were going over legislation and the execution of it as well. The power of oversight, however, is an implied power given to Congress.
The purpose of the power is to allow Congress to watch over and change any actions of the executive branch. The power relates to the checks and balances system because it ensures the executive branch is complying with the Constitution. Investigation within Congress allows it to look into special circumstances or find new information and sanctions the creation of new acts and clauses, whereas oversight is within the executive and allows Congress to make changes directly if necessary.
One of the most important implied powers of Congress is its oversight power. Congressional oversight is used to check on executive agencies and members of the executive. In 1949, during the Truman administration, the use of congressional oversight powers found corruption within high-ranking official agencies. Truman's military aide, Harry Vaughn, was known for seeking favors for friends and was caught in a freezer scandal.
Without the use of the congressional oversight powers on the executive branch, this corruption and others would have never been uncovered. This is why it's such a valuable implied power. The oversight power has been used since the 1790s and was useful in the Watergate scandal and the Iran-Contra affair, among others. The power has been used efficiently throughout history and is essential for checking the powers of the executive.
Although neither are explicitly stated in the Constitution, the inherent and implied powers are essential in keeping a balance between the executive and legislature. This demonstrates constitutionalism because it holds each branch accountable and ensures that they're upholding the Constitution. Oversight is a way to reflect the American people's worries on how the president could be abusing their power and allow a check to be made on the executive.
By Congress overseeing and investigating, the will of the people is shown directly through actual representation. The people voted for the representatives, and so the senators and congresspeople can effectively check the president through oversight to make sure they are protecting the natural rights of Americans. Thank you. We are now ready for your questions.
How can you measure the success or effectiveness of an investigation?
Well, I think that one of the best ways to kind of measure the success is by any acts or clauses that come from it. So for example, how we were talking about the interstate commerce clause, that shows how effective the investigatory power is used in that. And it also kind of talks like how recently with the Justice and Policing Act, how if like the Congress is investigating in Minnesota, the police department in Minneapolis, and how if that the effectiveness of it will be shown if the act is passed and like put into motion. So I think it's interesting to show like the effects of it is kind of the best way to measure it.
Yeah, kind of adding on to what Lily just said too, with the revisions, we've seen a lot of revisions historically. We've seen revisions to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Violence Against Women's Act of 1994. Like all of these acts having revisions, I think that shows that just these investigatory powers really show that we can make these changes if we see fit.
So by that, Michael, did you want to go ahead or? Okay, so by that notion, how would you measure the success of the investigation into the Ukrainian phone call with President Trump? Was that successful?
Well, I would say that it was successful because there was an investigation by the Congress, and despite what they may or may not have found, I think it was successful because one, we investigated it, and two, because there were people talking about it, like, oh, we need to investigate this. I think it was important for Congress to do so, and what they found wasn't necessary because because these people are elected officials, we can trust them with investigating properly and put our trust in them.
I would actually, sorry, Megan, do you want to go?
Yeah, okay. So I think I agree with what Walter said about how that their investigation with that phone call was successful. And I think also because by Trump calling to Ukraine and trying to find like that information, again, that could possibly be negative towards his opponent in his 2020 election. I think like that the phone call by Congress deciding to investigate that, I think was successful because it led to his impeachment, and it found that he was using his presidential powers for negative and personal gain rather than for the community. So
yeah.
So I'd like to go back over some of your testimony, and then you included this in one of your answers as well. Talk to me about the Interstate Commerce Clause and how this was this a result of an investigation or oversight? Tell me what you know about it.
Well, the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887, like we mentioned, was because Congress needed to investigate railroad and water regulations that were affecting American citizens within states. So it was really important that because of the dangers of the lack of federal regulations, it was necessary to help improve kind of the situations in which workers were and the railroad. And it was also one of the first federally regulated kind of industries. So it was interesting to see how this was one of the first examples of how the investigation power was used to start this kind of like precedent that federally you can regulate industries.
So
There was-
I want to go back a little bit in your testimony also, because I'm not, and I'm certain it's me, but I'm not clearly understanding how you're explaining the difference between investigatory powers and oversight. Could you give me just a clear answer as to what the difference is between oversight and investigation?
Yeah, so the investigation is, is when Congress looks into laws or looks into federal statutes and looks into certain people and says, okay, for example, the the Trump-Ukraine phone call, they looked into that and then they were able to find a verdict. And then the oversight power is like, hey, we made this federal statute or like an act. And so we should have somebody looking over it, seeing the effects. And so we can see that the investigation is a far more active power that Congress has, and the oversight is a much more passive one.
Yeah, going off of that, there's also in the Constitution about how, well, actually, neither of them are necessarily in the Constitution, but how one is inherent and one is implied. I think it's an important distinction between the two of them, which kind of almost shows itself in how they're both used today. And another distinction between them is how we kind of, the way we interpret it is that the investigation is more directly like within Congress to create legislation from and to see like to make sure that states and like federally everything is upholding the Constitution, whereas with the oversight it's more related to just the executive branch to like make sure administrative agencies are upholding the Constitution.
Well, first of all, I said the Interstate Commerce Clause. I meant the Interstate Commerce Act, and you answered it appropriately. So I want you to talk to me more about civil rights acts, the Voting Rights Act. Were those all a result of congressional inquiry? Those laws in the 60s, and then the Voting Rights Act, were they a result of inquiry?
So I would have to say that they were, because it was important for states that, like for example, that a lot of states for the Voting Rights Act weren't allowing people to vote, and that's so they had to, like states the federal government had to investigate states to see how they were disproportionately not allowing like Black Americans to vote. So they needed to use their investigation powers to look into that and then create the Voting Rights Act. And other, and like the Civil Rights Act was also a result of the federal government investigating.
Yeah, and another thing is,
I'm sorry, I just want to follow on something there. To what extent does partisanship influence congressional investigations?
well, partisanship is definitely interesting. We saw in the case of Donald Trump's first and second impeachment, some senators said, despite the evidence or anything, they would not vote to impeach. And this is interesting because usually in a case, you would have a non-biased jury. And the Senate serves as a very biased jury. I think the framers intended the impeachment to be a less partisan thing, as the framers didn't want a two-party system. I would say that partisanship plays a large role in impeachment, and
In the investigation. Sorry, I was just going off that. I think you meant investigation.
Okay, we're going to provide some feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll go ahead and go first. I think one thing that you did, and perhaps it was just a stroke of luck, but you mentioned VAWA, and I'm a domestic violence attorney. So I don't know if that was a stroke of luck or you know your audience. And I think that's something that is really important if you're able to listen to who we are, what we do, and adapt your argument. So I'm going to say you all did on purpose. So way to know your audience. I thought that once you were pressed to answer it, your explanation of the difference between oversight and investigation was good once you were pressed. I think that if you put that in your introduction, it will strengthen it. Lastly, I thought your point about effectiveness isn't just an act being made, but revisions to acts. I thought that was a very good argument, very strong. So overall, good job. Thank you. Michael?
Hello, Roger. You see Roger on the screen there. You know, one thing you did is you may or may not have noticed that I made a mistake in my question to you. I naturally said Interstate Commerce Clause because it's so much a part of constitutional history. But you were talking about the Interstate Commerce Act, and somehow you were able to take the answer in the right direction, even though I had asked the wrong question. So I appreciate your response to that. You actually knew that. And the reason I asked the question is because lots of times we have teams that will enter in lots of case histories or lots of laws and regulations, and they'll put them in there to make it look like they know their stuff, but they may not always know it. So I know you knew that because I asked the wrong question and you still got it. So that was good work. I'm glad you brought up, being that I live in Minnesota, the Justice in Policing Act, because we have been living that. You couldn't turn on the news for the last 6 months, any channel, and not see something about what's going on in Minnesota. So I'm glad you're able to bring it into modern times. That's really good, because this is not an easy thing to talk about. I mean, you don't get up on Sunday morning and say, hey, let's discuss oversight, shall we? But you're doing a good job with it. So the notion that you were interested in trusting the investigation, I kind of like that. I'm not sure we always can in light of the partisanship we were discussing as well, but I'd like to be able to trust it as well. Maybe when you guys get on the bench, we'll be trusting it even more. And by the way, good examples throughout history: Pearl Harbor, the Challenger, difference between executive issues and oversight and inquiries, Titanic, surveillance. Good job.
Thank you.
The curse of going last is that all I get to say is I agree with the great comments of the judges who came before me. I did have a couple of thoughts about how you might approach this if you are to move on. In your initial remarks, I did sense some conflating of the investigation and oversight provisions. It didn't ring clearly to me, not as clearly as your response to my question did. That was great. I like the proactive and reactive aspect of those two concepts. The biased jury is a very good answer to the question about the involvement of what role politics plays, especially now. I think historically it probably always has, but it may just be a little highlighted right now for a lot of reasons. And the last comment I would make is, if you were to move on, I'd like to hear a little bit about why we may have a heightened sense of partisanship in these congressional functions today, social media and those types of things. So thank you very much. Good conversation and a fun job with a difficult topic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's congratulate the students on their effort and participation today. Thank you so